G'day campers and drivers, I'm Jay, this is Bash.
And you are watching Camp and Drive Australia.
Oh, it is now time for us to talk about power. Oh, this thing's heavy. This is an Engel battery box and it contains a 120 amp hour AGM battery. The reason we got this battery in the first place, this was quite old now, it's at least 6 years old, it's been around the entire country. The reason we originally decided we needed power when we were camping was I use a CPAP machine at night to help me breathe, and we needed something to supply power for that machine. And so this was the answer to that problem. And while heavy, it did do the trick. It's now used as our fridge battery. So I've got an Engel fridge in the car, and this battery now is used to power that. Opening up that visor, you can see it's got a normal cigarette or 12 volt outlet. It's also got one specifically for the Engel fridge plug. And the bonus of that is these cigarette plugs, they are notorious for rattling loose on bumpy roads, and you don't want your fridge becoming disconnected, unbeknownst to you, while you're driving along, because then all your food goes off and you might be in the middle of nowhere. The Engel plug screws in here, so actually put it in, screw it in, and it will stay put, so you're guaranteed that connection is going to stay. When we got the Engel fridge, having this battery box already was quite the blessing. There are three things to note with an AGM battery. One is that they are cheaper than lithium batteries, so if you're on an absolute budget, and budget is the single most important factor, then an AGM battery may well be for you. But when you take into account the second point, which is weight, you may decide against it, because this battery, 120 amp hours, weighs around about 30 kilograms, whereas a similar sized lithium battery, and by similar size I mean physically similar sized, weighs about 10 kilos, so a third of the weight, and that weight is a huge difference if you have to move it. And if you're going overlanding or four-wheel driving, all of the weight in your car counts as well, so a 20 kilo difference between batteries is important. The third thing to remember is that this says 120 amp hour AGM battery. You might think to yourself, well, I've got 120 amp hours of usable power. No, you do not. Being an AGM battery, you should not, you can, but you shouldn't run this below 50%, because once you run it below 50%, you start damaging the battery, and if you run it all the way flat, you can kill your battery dead. Not necessarily the case, you may be able to jump start it again, but yeah, you don't want to run these below 50% on a regular basis. You'll destroy your battery. We've never done it to this one. We've had it for 6 years. It's still in extremely good condition. And as an AGM battery, when it's at home and not in use, it's left plugged in and on a float cycle. So that's just like it keeps putting a gentle trickle charge into it. And that's how you maintain these batteries when they're not in use. Packed up tightly in here, I've got my Ridge Rider solar blanket. The reason I went for a solar blanket in the first place was because we were still using the Jeep Wrangler, which was a short wheelbase and just had next to no storage space, when we first decided we needed electricity in there for solar. And this packs up really small, which is great. Now the only downside of them, of course, is you can't sit them on the ground and angle them towards the sun. If you put them on the ground, they're flat. Obviously anywhere you put them, they're flat. You can either put them on the roof of your car, or if you've got your car pointing in the right direction, you can have it sort of on the windscreen and the bonnet. Because of the way we're facing, I'm just going to pop it up on the roof and then plug it straight into the battery that's running the fridge. There is a lead in here as well for the Anderson plugs. So this is what connects the solar panel to the battery. Some solar panels have built-in solar controllers. This one doesn't, and it doesn't need it because of the battery that I've got, or the battery box that I've got. The battery box is an Engel battery box that has its own built-in solar controller, so that's taken care of. It's all good. On 84% I said at the moment, or 86. That would easily last me until tomorrow, but like I said, solar's there, you never know, may as well use it. Our second battery box here is the Blue Eddy EB70. I had this for a couple of years now. The reason I got this was because that original battery box, we decided we're going to get a fridge after years of camping with no cold drinks and no cold food, we decided it was time, so we splashed out on the fridge using that battery and battery box for that. So then I needed this for my CPAP, and also to charge up a few things like telephones, cameras for example, that sort of thing. And a friend of ours had a Blue Eddy, and we thought, well, not the same one as this, a more expensive model, but we thought we'd give them a go because he seemed pretty satisfied with his. And I've got to say, I'm pretty satisfied with this as well. I don't know exactly how many amp hours this is, because for some reason in their advertising they use a different metric for power. But I would say that it holds about the same amount of power as that 120 amp hour AGM battery, or the same amount of usable power. So I'm going to guess around about 60 amp hours of actual usable power. There's two 240 volt power plugs here, so there's a built-in inverter to deal with those, and they combined can put out 1,000 watts. So you can plug in anything up to 1,000 watts. So still not a toaster or a hairdryer, but some pretty power-hungry appliances can go in there if you need them for short periods of time. It's got a cigarette or 12 volt connector there. It has two USB-A's and two USB-C's, so you can charge from those. And for reasons unknown to me, I don't know why these are here, but these are two 12 volt outlets, and I can't imagine who would use those. We certainly don't, but they're there if somebody decides they need them. This will easily run my CPAP, charge my phone, charge my watch for 2 nights, and 3 at a pinch. And last but not least is another Engel battery box. Now you might notice how much easier that one was for me to handle. You can pick it up with 2 hands, you can hold it with 1, and the reason for that is it has a lithium LiFePO4 battery inside it, which only weighs about 10 kilos. And that makes a huge difference when you're lugging this thing around. Like the AGM, it calls itself 120 amp hour, that particular battery. But it's 120 usable amp hours. This thing you can run down to flat and then just recharge it and off you go. So there's a lot of power in this battery. Now the reason we ended up getting another battery was we started doing our videos, started doing our YouTube channel, and we ended up having a lot more stuff to charge. So the Blue Eddy, which I use mainly for my CPAP, can't afford to run that flat because I do need the CPAP at night, and of course the fridge needs to stay plugged in constantly and we need the power for that. So this is our backup power, and so we bring it with us. It's really easy to lug around because it's so light. I bought the Engel battery box again because I was so pleased with how robust the first one was. So it seemed a smart move to get another Engel battery box. And look, I'm not unhappy with it in any way. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. It behaves exactly as the other one does. But I wasn't really thinking about what it was that we were using it for, which is plugging in a whole lot of electronics. Now the outputs on this are not that varied. Just like the other Engel battery box that I showed you but didn't show you the side, it does have a built-in inverter, and it does have a 240 volt plug, and it does have one USB-A outlet there. In here, as I showed you before, you've got one cigarette plug or 12 volt plug, which is usable. This one is only usable for the Engel fridge, so that's pretty much just forget about it. So the only outlet on the front is the 12 volt one, and none of our electronic products will plug directly into that, obviously. If you're talking about an iPhone or an iPad or most cameras, they're not going to be plugging into that. But yeah, given another opportunity to buy a battery box, I probably would have looked at something else, purely and simply on the basis that this has so few outlets that we actually need. Very happy having gone the LiFePO4 chemistry. It's the most stable of the lithium batteries apparently. And yeah, this thing will hopefully last us 10 years, just like the AGM has lasted us 6 so far, and doesn't look like quitting anytime soon.